Professor Edward Zhang from University of California, Riverside, and the title of his lecture is Multicultural to Multi-Ethnic Korea, and then the subtitle is What is Ethnic Studies? So you're in the Ethnic Studies department.
Right.
So, okay. Okay, please join me to welcome Dr.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and I'd like to thank Professor Song and Mo for organizing this wonderful conference. And I will be presenting keynote Friday, but this is kind of a shorter version of what I will be presenting. And I will be focusing on mainly ethnic studies. Ethnic studies as an academic discipline began officially, I would say, 1984 in the United States. I was one of the first ethnic studies PhD candidates that were admitted to UC Berkeley in 1984. So this year commemorates 40th anniversary of ethnic studies becoming academic discipline. It's kind of a new scholarly discipline. Why is it not moving?
Wait.
Huh?
When you click it.
I did click or
전원이 켜져 있나요?
전원
USB 이쪽에 꽂혀
Now
it
it
works.
works.
Okay, on March 18, 2021, State of California Department of Education officially approved ethnic studies curriculum, which Korean American experiences and inter-ethnic relations lesson plans were adopted, and 6 other Korean American lesson plans were included as supplementary resources. So what this is, ethnic studies has become requirement for all high school students in California. So this is a game changer, right? As every student are required to take ethnic studies, at least one class, in order to graduate from high school. And so when the Department of Education announced this plan, initially Korean American lesson plans were not included at all. They included the Japanese American story, internment, Filipino farm worker stories. So we had to hastily gather scholars in Korean American studies to push to include Korean American studies lesson plans. And not only high schools, officially by 2025 and 2026 school year, under AB 101 with graduation requirement set for implementation by 2030. CSU, California State University, also adopted an area of F and requirement, which at least take 1 3-unit ethnic studies course to graduate. The requirement affects students in the this year, 2024 and 25 academic year. In other words, all CSU, California State University students are required to take at least 1 ethnic studies in order to graduate. It's a requirement, absolute mandatory. You know what? My campus, University of California, Riverside, adopted this in 1989. We were the first major university to have ethnic studies requirement in since 1989. No other university had that. So I'm very proud that this requirement, the reason why it's so important is because when we talk about multiculturalism, diversity, equity, what does it really mean, right? And who is teaching diversity? Who is teaching multiculturalism, that makes a huge difference from what perspective, right? So that's the reason why Berkeley has similar requirement, American culture requirement, but professors in sociology or history, they can teach to fulfill the requirement. Whereas ethnic studies requirement means only ethnic studies faculty class fulfills the requirement. That is very important. By implementing ethnic studies course requirement in high schools and colleges, students will learn about the multi-ethnic communities, the history of racialized experiences of the American people, and more. And it promotes unity through understanding, building bridges between cultures, creating empathy between communities of color, whose voices and identities are often left out of the U.S. historical narrative, which is told through singular Western Eurocentric perspective. That is the case right now in K-12. In K-12 education, is still mostly Eurocentric white perspective. History textbook is about this thick, and there aren't that many person of color included in that curriculum. But it'll change. California is changing that. Since California has adopted this requirement, many other states, mostly blue states, we talk about blue and red state in the United States politics of race, mostly blue states are beginning to adopt this requirement. For example, the state of Michigan have implemented Asian American Studies requirement. And Connecticut also is implementing ethnic studies requirement. So it is spreading mostly blue states. I don't think southern states, red states will adopt this at all. In fact, they're attacking, Wayne is talking about, attacking this ethnic study requirement, critical race theory, all that. And in fact, I arrived in Korea yesterday. I left LAX Monday, which was Memorial Day. And this video, I don't know whether it'll play or not, but it's a story of Colonel Young Kim. I don't think it's playing. Can you play this? It's a video. It's not opening.
Try it.
And if not, it's okay too. The reason I wanted to show this, I'm also the director of Young Kim Center for Korean American Studies at University of California, Riverside. I'm very proud of the fact that, okay. I think you should know about him too anyway.
George S. Patton, Douglas MacArthur, George Washington, all are famous military commanders. In honor of AAPI heritage, add this name, Young Ok Kim. Fox 11's Susan Hirasuna introduces us to this unsung hero of both World War II and the Korean War.
In 1941, it took an act of Congress to allow Asian Americans to join the military. Young Ok Kim signed up, and in basic training, he was a standout. He was sent to officer candidate school, even though minorities were believed to be inferior. Here he is in an interview with the Japanese American National Museum in 1995.
I realized that I was living in a country that was very racist.
Racism kept him from an immediate assignment to a battalion unit. A different kind of racism almost got him transferred out when he did. He was assigned to the 100th Infantry Battalion, an all-Japanese American unit.
I just got here. I'm just reporting. Why you transferred me? He said, well, you're Korean and these men are all Japanese Americans. And he says historically Koreans and Japanese don't get along.
Stay he did, where his men went from wary to fully dedicated.
MSN.com in 2011 named 16 American war heroes, and one of them is Young Ok Kim.
Professor Edward Chang of the Young Ok Kim Center at UC Riverside says Kim had a unique talent, memorizing maps and visualizing enemy positions.
That's the reason why many Japanese American men began to follow him. I need to go with him. then I will come back alive.
Kim earned multiple medals, including 3 Purple Hearts. The most remarkable is the Distinguished Service Cross, not only because it's the Army's second highest honor, but also because he got word of the award immediately after an incredible feat of bravery that led to the liberation of Rome.
Basically, there was DMZ, no man's land. Anything moved, they would shoot at each other. Previous attempts were all done at night. But Young-Oh Kim decided we'll go early morning. Early morning, because soldiers stayed awake all night long, they lose their guard. So he crawls into German territories, avoiding all the landmines everywhere, and captured 2 German prisoners of war, and crawled back to Allied position.
Information from the 2 Germans revealed the Nazi tanks were not in position to stop the Allies. Kim saw victories and heartbreak. So many men lost.
Colonel Kim was so dedicated to his men that when he watched them die one after the other, he pledged to find a way to memorialize their sacrifice. You can see that here at the Japanese American National Museum and steps away at the Go for Broke Monument.
Kim chaired the Go for Broke Educational Foundation, and in 1989, the Go for Broke Monument was dedicated. But his humanitarian efforts went so much further. He helped orphans during his service in the Korean War. Then after his military career, he helped domestic violence victims, the homeless, and helped found multiple entities serving the Korean American community.
He cared about people who were being discriminated against and were not in position to defend themselves.
Professor Chang remembers a humble man, but one who may have died disappointed. Kim was nominated but not awarded the ultimate recognition from his country, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, even when 21 members of the 100th 442nd Regimental Combat Team did.
He purchased a ticket. It was almost insured, but somehow, last minute, his name was dropped.
Young-Oh Kim.
Today, there are efforts to give Colonel Kim the award posthumously. Kim never had children of his own, but his name lives on with these students at the Young-Oh Kim Academy in Koreatown.
Young-Oh Kim was a very, very famous Korean American.
Susan Hirosuna, Fox 11 News.
Thank you. The reason why I wanted to show this because he relates to so many different people, Japanese Americans. He fought in Italy, so he really fit in nicely to our conference, right? Yeah, it does. Anyway, I was saying the Young-Oh Kim Center for Korean American Studies at University of California, Riverside. I'm very proud that I was able to name our research center after his name, Korean American hero. And we are celebrating his contribution to building very diverse, multi-ethnic United States, right? He fought against prejudice and racism and being the subject of colonized minority. At the time, Korea was a colony of Japan, right? So he had to overcome all kinds of different barriers, and yet he stands alone, and I'm still teaching about him in my students. Anyway, that is ethnic studies. That is. And hopefully in the future, multi-ethnic Korea can identify multi-ethnic heroes and include them in part of the curriculum and celebrate. I saw your newspaper celebrating multi-ethnic, multicultural week in Seoul National University last week, right?
Last week.
Yeah, last week. So
Cultural diversity.
right, cultural diversity. So you can include and identify, discover, heroes or someone who has a huge contribution for Korea and put them in part of the curriculum. I think ethnic studies, study of race and ethnicity in comparative perspective, they gain greater multicultural insight and understanding, critically examining inter and intra-group differences and commonalities in history, culture, racism, and impact of law, social inequalities in contemporary society. This is my syllabus, actually. Analyze conflicts, tensions, and building of effective intergroup coalitions and alliances among racially subordinate groups, and prepare students to enter the workforce and function effectively, critically as informed citizens in a diverse multicultural society. And finally, ethnic studies majors should be able to comprehensively describe and analyze the history, function, and ongoing effects of racism in America. And I want to focus on Asian American studies, right? Asian American studies. Asian American studies began in 1968. We know that. So it's relatively, recent. Why? It's like, in Korea, student revolution on April 19, 1960, creating a whole new academic discipline. And ethnic studies emerged out of student activism. San Francisco State University students, Black students, Latino students, Native American students, Asian American students went on strike against the university. And they demanded ethnic studies. They demanded because they were not teaching their own history. They were only teaching white European history. So students of color saying, we want to learn our own history. We want to be proud of our own history. We want to be proud of our identity. That's what ethnic studies is all about, right? And followed by UC Berkeley. And, and UC Berkeley students also went on strike in 1969 or 70. And in the beginning, it was mostly taught by graduate students, community activists, as a form of lecturers. So they really did not have any academic legitimacy, right? Because we did not have professors, any tenure-track professors. And only in 1984, when UC Berkeley announced nation's first PhD in ethnic studies, that was the beginning of academic discipline. He's about 6 years behind. June came, in ethnic studies. Yeah. I was surprised to see him too. And that's the Daily Californian in 1984. And that's me.
Oh, Daily California.
Yeah,
that's a Berkeley newspaper.
Yes,
Daily newspaper.
That's a Ron Takaki. Yeah, so
History.
yeah, that's a history making. Charles Henry did both my professors.
Oh.
Yeah, and Ron Takaki passed away, unfortunately. Anyway, so one of the key conflict right now having in the United States is so-called critical race theory, right? The red states are attacking critical race theory, and blue states are promoting critical race theory. So what is critical race theory? We believe race is not biological concept. Instead, it is a social, political construct. In other words, it could fluctuate, it could change. That's the first step, because in the United States, it's always been the case. It was a politically defined, politically ruled in the name of courts. Always race. Race was the fundamental part. I think race trumps class and gender in the United States. And that's the core of the critical race theory, and not biological, and that racism is not merely a product of individual bias or prejudice, but also something embedded in legal systems and policies. Racism is inherent in the law and legal institutions of the United States, maintain social, economic, political inequalities between whites and non-whites. And critical race theory also promotes racial equality and eliminate all race-based and other unjust hierarchies. That's the goal. Because the goal is equity, equality, diversity, and inclusion. That's the whole policy of the United States. You know, a former Republican candidate who ran against Donald Trump, Nikki Haley, she's an Asian Indian heritage. She said, America has never been a racist country. That's what she said. That's 100% lie, false, 100% false. You know, Naturalization Law of 1790, the law passed 1790 in the United States states who is eligible to become a citizen of the United States. It said only free white persons are eligible. Therefore, Asians, we are not eligible. Blacks, you are not eligible. Latino, Chicano, you are not. Native Americans, you are not eligible. Only free white persons. What this means, United States of America, the founding fathers dreamt of creating nations of white only. That was their intent. Contrary to the belief that United States was always been multi-ethnic, multi-racial society. No, that's not the case. They dreamt of creating white nation. The Donald Trump is trying to resurrect their dream. That's what he's standing for. White nationalist ideology, right? But because of labor shortages, you know, that's the main problem of capitalism, right? In the capitalist economy, cheap labor. Korea is experiencing the same thing. The reason why Korea has become multicultural society from one race nation is because of labor shortages, right? Labor shortages. So this is Angel Island. Everyone learns about Ellis Island, Statue of Liberty, freedom, equality, justice, that represents. Angel Island is anything but freedom, equality, and justice. It's a detention center. It's a gateway to America. Most Asian immigrants enter through Angel Island, but they do not teach in K-12 about this. But now, because of ethnic studies requirement, all students will learn about this. It's the ugly history of the United States, dark history. And since I need to move on, because he's saying I only have 3 minutes. Lesson plans, Korean American experiences and interethnic relations were included. You know, guess who wrote this? Me. I wrote this, and it was included as a part of the lesson plan. And the rest of them is supplementary materials. I also wrote about Colonel Young Kim, and I also wrote, I wrote 3 of them. Anyway, so, and based on these experiences, I decided to organize the nation's first Korean American Studies Conference. So we had Korean American Studies Conference in 2022, and last year, 2023, second. And this year, it will be held at our campus, University of California, Riverside, on September 21st, third Korean American Studies Conference. So somehow, I'm trying to expand this beyond California, trying to make it national and international, hopefully focusing on K-12 education. So one of the unique features about this conference is not typical academic conference. We include weekend school teachers as well as community organizers and teachers, so as well as scholars. This is how Asian American population increased. Yeah, this is also very important. Word matters. Word matters. You know, instead of a Korean hyphenated American, we use Korean American without hyphen. Why? It's because the hyphen is very important, because the hyphen is used between 2 equal partners. right? So, you know, he assumes you're only half American, half Korean. But Colonel Young Kim said, famously, he said, I am 100% American and I am 100% Korean. That's what he said. Why should I divide my loyalty into half? As a global citizen, how true that is, right? It's a globalization. I'm 100% Korean, 100% Vietnamese. They can say that in the future. You know, that's the kind of a game changer. That's how you need to think, right? Critically. You know, until 1960s, Asians were called Orientals. But we decided to go against that. It's like being N-word. We want to use Asian American, American of Asian descent. Instead of riots, you know, civil unrest. You know, word matters. So I'm proposing multicultural in Korea has become synonymous with not only different but inferior. So you need to come up with a new terminology to embrace diversity, to embrace differences, and equal, right? That's the. I think we need to come up with a new word. Well, you know, in the Korean word, Korean word, the 당론 has become something that is kind of a connotation of a negativity, inferiority, right? Already, it's built in. So we need to come up with a new term that can be more equal and embracing differences. Anyway, I will stop here and then I will present more fuller version Friday. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so my talk will, I think, help sort of go well with Dr. Chang's presentation because we have some overlapping, particularly around what it means to think about ethnic studies in a K-12 context versus a higher education context. But basically, what I'm focusing on, and this is different from my keynote tomorrow. My keynote tomorrow will be entirely different from this. But basically, the United States is in the middle of really a war over the politics of knowledge, right? It's what, and ultimately that is a war of the identity, for the identity of the United States, right? How is the United States going to be defined? And therefore, the question after that is, then what do we teach the children, right? And that's the fight that is happening right now across the country. So currently in the U.S., at least 42 states have tried to ban critical race theory, or what they think is critical race theory. Every time there's a ban, it's always like other weird things. And these people are really kind of bonkers, right? They don't understand what they're talking about when they try and ban critical race theory. They're trying to ban things like social emotional learning as critical race theory, right? They're trying to ban all sorts of things. They don't even know what it is. We're seeing books being banned in many states. In 2022, we saw over 300 anti-LGBTQ bills introduced or were considered in different U.S. states. We're getting violent right-wing attacks on events like drag queen story hours, which has become sort of a thing to try and normalize folks in the trans community. Discussions around gender and identity and sexual orientation, they've been banned in many states. And Florida is a prime example. I'll talk about Florida in a minute. We're seeing books affirming LGBTQ identity being taken out of classrooms and libraries. We have politicians openly talking about eradicating trans people, like using the language of eradication, right? And also we've seen recently the U.S. Supreme Court ending affirmative action, race-based affirmative action, making it unconstitutional in the U.S. We have bans on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Anything DEI is getting attacked, and that's been the new one lately. It just goes through these different cycles. It was critical race theory, then they went after LGBTQ community. Now DEI is the one that's in the circulation in the far right community in the United States, and we're seeing the defunding of diversity infrastructure. So, for instance, just about maybe 6 weeks ago, a month ago. So Texas passed a law making DEI illegal. And so the University of Texas Austin, right, big research university, they defunded their entire diversity structure. So all of the associate deans for diversity were basically put back into faculty positions. They took all the money they had invested in that was named around diversity and put it for teaching and students and just wiped out everything connected to it. So that's kind of the situation in some states. But we worry because states like Texas and Florida sort of become a bellwether. They become sort of like what's possible, what people are talking about is possible. A couple other examples. Missouri's got a bill banning CRT. They're trying to pay teachers money to take courses in teaching patriotism, right? Real strong white supremacist, white nationalist, Christian nationalist, particularly kind of Christian nationalist approach to thinking about identity in schools and knowledge. And the Texas governor actually was talking about trying to get rid of tenure in universities there. Florida had its Stop Woke Act, they called it. They banned discussion of anything related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Can you imagine that being a K-12 teacher in a state as diverse as Florida and being basically told it is illegal for you to talk about race or racism in your classroom, right? You can't talk about equity and inclusion in those classroom spaces. It's really mind-blowing. We saw bans on advanced placement in African American studies. Again, this is just Florida. Florida's really far out there, but the problem what happens when we have right-wing extremism taking over large state sort of apparatuses is it sets a new bar of like what people understand is possible, and it moves the whole thing rightward, I think. It moves the whole set of politics to the right for the whole country. We've seen books being removed from libraries. Folks are trying to close down women's studies programs. I already talked about NDEI and tenure. So what's important though, and this is what I want to focus on, it's easy for us to get caught up with like how bad things are. But I also like to highlight like, hey, there's local and national sort of organizing against these sort of really conservative, really detrimental attacks on multicultural and diversity and social justice education in the United States. We're seeing student walkouts, we have teachers educating themselves, and really strong campaigns where folks are committing, like, there's a really good campaign called Teach the Truth campaign, right? The idea is like, hey, we just want to teach the truth about U.S. history, right? We need to talk about, colonization and settler colonialism. We need to talk about, chattel slavery and enslavement of Africans, to maintain sort of white property in the United States. We need to talk about the role of early Chinese, Japanese, and Korean labor and how that was used to sort of settle the West. And so there's things that really need to be taught, and teachers are committing to these things. This is just, there's one picture from one rally in the U.S., but across the last couple of years we've seen students protesting, just as one example, students protesting anti-trans and anti-LGBT laws. Virginia, Kentucky, Iowa, Oklahoma, Florida, Arizona, Utah, California. And this is all really important to understand that even though we have like a regressive political movement in the United States, this is the thing about education, right? Is that it's always a side of contestation, right? Education is always a place where, yes, we have hegemonic politics being sort of forced down on us as teachers, as educators, even as university professors. But students and parents and communities and teachers are always pushing back on those politics. And so I do a lot of work with Rethinking Schools. This is, we've been around, I haven't been involved for 35 years, but Rethinking Schools is a nonprofit organization, an NGO in the United States that's been around for about 35 years. And is considered sort of a leader in sort of teaching social justice, doing anti-racist education, social justice education. And one of the things that makes Rethinking Schools so unique, or has been across this time, is that the articles, it's a magazine, quarterly magazine, it's also a book publisher, webpage, but one of the things that makes it so unique is that a lot of the articles and a lot of the editors of Rethinking Schools are current or former K-12 teachers. So it's really for practicing classroom teachers. And so at Rethinking Schools, we have our own sort of model about what it means to teach for justice as a way to sort of push back on what has been happening across the country. So the first part of our model is that teaching for social justice really has to be grounded in the lives of students. And this is a really basic sort of tenet for us, right? We have the students in front of us, we have their communities, right? If our students are there, their communities are there. And so if we're going to be working with them in ways that are aimed at justice, we need to be able to make sure that we are tending to their lived experiences as students, as people, as humans, as cultural beings in this world. Another aspect of how we see teaching for social justice or rethinking schools is pedagogic. It's got to be through dialogue, right? I guess it's ironic for me to be giving a lecture on that we need to do dialogue, but we only have 20 minutes. So we wouldn't have time for all the dialogue. But the pedagogy has to be interactive and engaging. We have to honor, and this is very much in the spirit of Paulo Freire, right? We have to understand and honor the power that students have and what they bring to us, and make sure we are engaging with them through our pedagogy, through dialogue. Can't just be lecture. We also want to critically support students' identities in this work, right? And I added critically to this because, what does it mean if your students have, say, a white supremacist identity? I don't want them to come in and say, oh, I'm just going to support you as a white supremacist, right? We want them to actually critically reflect on who they are, okay? And think about who they are in relation to other people, all right? But at the same time, we want to also support, make sure that their experiences matter, right? And that they are sort of in this classroom, and we want to sort of recognize, who they are in our curriculum. Another aspect is embracing the value of students' home languages. We got really concrete with this. In the United States, right, we have so many languages, and we're so terrible about our language policy, right? We have English-only policies effectively and sometimes legally in multiple U.S. states. But even where we don't have English-only policies, Americans are the worst. I only speak English, right? We're not multilingual. We need to figure out how to support the students, again, that are in front of us, what they bring from their homes, what they bring from their home countries, what they bring from their home cultures, and make sure we are figuring out ways to value that in the curriculum. Another aspect is we invite engagement with serious social and political issues. Now, one of the things that folks, I think, when we think about K-12 education, they make a mistake and think, oh, these are kids. They're too young to think about politics. And that is entirely wrong. Kids are smart, right? They're in the world. They see things, especially young children. People think, oh, how are you going to teach a fourth or third or second or even a kindergartner, right, about justice? They see things about things being fair and unfair so sharply, right? They know when folks are lying. They know when folks aren't treating people well. We can use that as a basis for that's engagement in politics, right? And so we want students to be, again, in the Freudian sense, sort of understanding themselves in and with the world through the curriculum and the work that they're doing in the classrooms. We also want, again, this is turning back to pedagogy a little bit. We want to create classroom environments where there's meaningful student engagement, right? So dialogue is part of that, but also what kinds of work are we doing where students feel like they are sort of, owning the curriculum and owning the educational experience, right? And we want to make sure that we're teaching in ways that help foster that. Because that's how we want to think about sort of, even if we think broadly about democratic education and folks, students feeling like they own that experience, that means that they need to be engaged pedagogically in ways where they feel like they own the knowledge, and it's not just up to the teachers. Another aspect is recognizing that learning is impossible without teaching for social justice, right? Oftentimes we think about justice as an add-on thing to the curriculum, and really this is trying to say, no. Deep learning requires that we think about the world, right? If we want our students to really, really engage and really, really think deeply about what they're learning about, then we do that better when we can sort of connect that with what they're experiencing in their lives. And it's got to be across the curriculum. Right, often people are like, oh yeah, social justice, that's great for humanities, language arts, social studies, but I teach math, there's no politics in math. I'm like, no, actually there are politics in math, and there's a whole movement right now around sort of ethnic studies, mathematics education at the K-12 level, and really kind of showing about what kind of cultural models are going into our understanding of mathematics and the kinds of logics we use and how to really expand how folks are thinking about mathematics. So we can do it across all the curriculum. We also want to explore how social, economic, and cultural institutions contribute to inequality, and this is really in alignment with the ethnic studies lens as well. Like these things are not individual; it's about systemic systems and structures, right? And then we're trying to critically analyze that. And we also recognize that it's an anti-racist struggle that is really trying to critique Eurocentric school knowledge in the United States, which Dr. Chang also discussed earlier. And then finally, it can't be all critique. We need to build and sort of see like strength and power in our work. And so we have to teach about social movements, right? And fights against nativism, xenophobia, and white supremacy. Like students need to see that not only are they sort of powerful in the classroom space, but that they're powerful, that their communities, that their peoples are powerful historically, right? And that we all were able to get things done when we worked together to struggle for justice. And then also, in line with that, we need to start teaching towards healing and joy. And this is actually probably what's happening more at the forefront around some of the K-12 ethnic studies work that's happening in the US right now. Our folks are really trying to look at how do we find healing? How do we heal from trauma in our educational experiences, right? And so it's a big and a hard question because I don't know how, like, it's hard to answer that in the context of K-12 institutions, which are very much settler colonial institutions in the United States and actually are kind of constructed to inflict trauma and harm, but this is where the conversation is right now. Okay, so some examples, we can talk about K-12 ethnic studies. This is one of the books that I co-edited with some folks from California around doing K-12 ethnic studies. This is from one of the chapters from the book called What is Ethnic Studies Pedagogy? This is how K-12 folks are sort of translating ethnic studies into the classroom. They define it as a philosophy of education informed by positionalities, ideologies, and standpoints of both teacher and learner. It takes into account the critical relationships between the purpose of education, the context of education, the content of what's being taught, and the methods of how it's taught. Right? So this whole thing around content and methods and purpose is all wrapped up together in K-12 ethnic studies. It includes the identity of who's being taught, the identity of who is teaching, their relationship to each other, and their relationship to structure and power, right? Work and purposes, working towards decolonization and elimination of racism, critical reflection on teachers' own identities, culturally responsive pedagogies, and community responsive pedagogies. And this is one of the biggest difficulties around saying, so it's great that California has this graduation requirement. The hard part is we have an army of K-12 public school teachers who are predominantly white across the country, and they don't understand ethnic studies content. They don't even understand themselves as white people, right? And so now it's like, okay, you need to go teach ethnic studies. There's a requirement, but there aren't enough ethnic studies teachers to do it, right? And so now we have to think about, okay, so what kind of professional development? How are we going to train these folks up? But that's a multi-year process that is really hard. It takes them like relearning themselves as white people, relearning their content, and then relearning how to teach that content to their students. So it's a big lift. I did a lot of that work in Seattle, and we did not have the resources, and it was not successful. Anyways, some models or some examples. There's a fight around the California ethnic studies. A lot of folks think that it got co-opted into the state version instead of what the original intent was. So then a different group popped up. They called themselves the Libertarian Ethnic Studies group. They offer institutes around this stuff. Some other examples, Abolitionist Teaching Network. Some of you might be familiar, or maybe not, in this context. But Bettina Love's work around abolitionist education. Dr. Love was a co-founder of this and of this group, and they're doing a lot of really the abolitionist movement in education is also one of the leading edges. Thinking about how do we, I don't know how this would translate, but how do we, make education de-carceral? So the idea of abolition is around the state is carceral, that it wants to lock people up and discipline people, and we want to try and reverse that and think about education as a space of healing and from healing from trauma. That's where a lot of the trauma work happens, is in abolitionist teaching. There's also Education for Liberation Network, also a really, really great space in the United States. They run a conference every other year. Again, these are just some concrete examples of so you can just see some of the folks that are doing this kind of work. I talked about the Teach the Truth campaign, the Zinn Education Project. If you're familiar with the U.S. historian Howard Zinn, This has been endorsed by his estate. The Zinn estate has been supportive of this work with the Zinn Education Project, doing curriculum for K-12 teachers around basically, again, taking the spirit of Howard Zinn's work. Howard Zinn focused a lot on race and class justice and the teaching of U.S. history. And so, although he did not include Asian Americans in his book, which is a whole other issue. But there's a lot of great resources here, free resources for teachers. As part of the Zinn Education Project, one of the big things that they're doing is the Teach the Black Freedom Struggle project as well, helping teachers understand how to do this work across the country around teaching black history, and not just the oppression of black people, but like how do we understand like the era of like Reconstruction in the United States when sort of black power was institutionalized before the white folks crushed it. There's a whole Black Lives Matter at School movement that's going on as well across. There's it started off with a week, and then started off with like a day, and then became a whole week. And these folks meet annually. They create curriculum, and then there's schools across the country who pick it up and follow the week of action. And of course, Rethinking Schools continues to support this work. We just did our spring issue on teaching Palestine, which was like incredibly popular and sold out immediately. And this is important to think about, and this I'll speak a little bit, I'll talk about this tomorrow in my keynote some more, but there's a push, particularly from the author, the Pulitzer Prize winning author Viet Nguyen. He has a great essay around this idea of what he calls expansive solidarity, and he argues that if we understand sort of the history of Orientalism and how Asia was cast by the West, almost done, how Asia was cast by the West, we have to understand that actually Palestine is part of Asia. And so if we want to think about our solidarities with what's happening with the war on Gaza and the war on Palestine, then we need to be, as Asians and Asian Americans, we need to be understanding our relationship with all that better. And so these are just kind of considerations. And I'll say like, one interesting thing, and I forgot to mention this at the beginning, this particular presentation, I actually got banned from a school district in Southern California, actually close to Riverside. They invited me down to speak, and then the superintendent's office called me. I was already there. The superintendent's office called me and said, hey, we saw your slides, we're still going to pay you, but we'd like you to either change the slides or, they didn't tell me not to speak, but they said, you either change them, or if you can't change them, then we'll cancel the talk, is what happened. So, yeah. I wrote about it for Rethinking Schools. So, but anyways, and I thought about that because of this whole thing around sort of both sides, right? There's people who try and say, oh, we got to teach both sides. And so, okay, if you're going to ask us to teach both sides, then actually we're going to drown you in multiple perspectives and the true complexity of what's going on, right? Like we have to really, really go after folks and say, understand, okay, you don't want, it's not just about whether or not racism exists or not. Let's just talk about all these experiences of all these people, and we can actually show you that it exists, right? And I always tell folks when I'm talking particularly with K-12 audiences, but also it's true in higher ed right now, like we have to understand our risks, we have to be strategic. But, people are getting fired now in the United States over this content. In some spaces it's been really, really sort of scary. And I think even in higher ed, we get worried. You can get canceled. The wrong student records your stuff, and suddenly you're on some white supremacist website, and then suddenly you're doxxed, and all your information's out on the web, and people are coming out. Like that happens to people on it's not happening every day. I'm not trying to freak everybody out, but it does happen. You wind up on Fox News, right? And then not in a good way like yours was. And the way to survive all this is building community, right? And doing this work together in community. You can't be the sole teacher doing this or the sole professor doing this. You need to be doing it in community with your students, in community with their parents, and with other educators as well. So I'm always about organizing. That's how you protect yourself, is you organize, whether it's through unions or anything else like that. That's the way we survive this current mess. All right, that's it for my talk today. I think I came in right on time. Also, I'm always self-promoting for Rethinking Schools, so if you want a discount, you can use that to get anything to Rethinking Schools. Anyway, so thank you, and that's my talk.
Dr. Claudia Fickbeiner from University of Kassel, Deutschland, Germany. And the title of her lecture is Discovering the Intangible Cultural Heritage of Self and Others Through Life Stories. Report on 3 empirical studies. Thank you so much.
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm really delighted to be here. It's very interesting to see these different perspectives on what we consider the same construct, intercultural education, and so I would like to start with my talk. This is my roadmap. After a brief introduction, I will talk about the concept of culture, and then I will just roughly introduce the 3 studies to you, and I will conclude in the end. I wanted to just show you the world map because it's always nice to see where we are all situated, and here you can see Europe, tiny little. In the middle you can see Germany, surrounded by many different neighbors, different languages and different cultures, and Germany itself has always been diverse, but now it's even a lot more diverse. Our classrooms are highly diverse, and so is the whole country. This is the situation, and I will start with the concept of culture with respect to intangible cultural heritage. The concept of intangible cultural heritage is crucial for intercultural dialogue and mutual respect. It includes traditions, living expressions, and social practices, and UNESCO quote, is an important factor in maintaining cultural diversity in the face of growing globalization, unquote. So I believe that life stories and language play an important role in the reciprocal process of discovery of the intangible cultural goods of the self and the other. We also have the iceberg metaphor, which is really old. You have to really dive deep into the intangible cultural heritage to find out about the invisible part, which is, for example, values, attitudes, beliefs, intentions, and so forth and so on. Can you hear me better now? Okay. In contrast to the tangible part, which is of course also important, such as language that is visible, language variety, style, fashion preferences, skin, tattoos, etc. My question is, how can we navigate through these unknown waters? And I mentioned that this morning as well. I think a global positioning system can help us, as we have it in the GPS. It will identify our position and direct us, and it's based on the assumption that a multicultural world calls for a multi-perspective approach. And the human GPS actually works like GPS. It is very important that we are in the on mode, otherwise our GPS will not work. Then we have to be willing to connect to other learners, such would be our first satellite, the first learner, or other person, other perspective. However, if we connect to one, we still can be anywhere on this radius, so we need a second perspective that we connect to just as the GPS, but even the second perspective doesn't localize us. So we need the third perspective, and only with 3 different perspectives we have a triangulation, and we can localize and position our own self. The conclusion is only in contrast to others and to difference can we find out who we are. Otherwise, we are blindfolded about our own self. I have a nice little video clip here to the human GPS. Maybe you want to take a photo because there's not enough time to show the clip, but you can watch it later, and a lot of examples how to work with the human GPS approach. Well, thank you very much. This brings me to the model we've been working with over many years. I met Patricia Ruggiano-Schmidt from Syracuse, New York, many years ago through the LRA conferences. And Patty actually, her work is based on the fact that mainly white, middle-class, Protestant female teachers teach students that are exactly the difference, that are completely different from themselves. So her big goal was to teach those teachers to be prepared for diverse classrooms, and she actually invented the ABCs model of cultural understanding and communication. And this model is being used to the very day, and there's a lot of publications. Sorry, I don't know how this comes in again. I would like to explain the ABCs model to you. The ABCs model consists of different steps. First of all, it is important to reflect on your own self. You have to think, where do you come from? What are your values and beliefs? So you sit down and write your own autobiography. This autobiography can have a focus, for example, on nature or on your profession, or it can just be a general autobiography, and you think about critical incidents that happen to you in life, successes and defeats. The second step is that you're teamed up with a person who is different with respect to your own self. In the European version, it can be an ethnic difference, religious difference. Patty, also coming from the United States, always focused on the fact that it has to be in skin color and race. So here we are in the same boat again, like the discussion we had before. In Europe, we also joined with different facets of the cultural construct. That's the second step. Then you interview the person and you write down the person's biography. The person is different from your own self. The heart and core of the ABCs is the steps C1, C2, and C3. C1 is the cross-cultural comparison of your own story and the story of the other. Then the deep analysis of those two stories, you comparing them. And then the development of culturally responsive ideas, which you actually develop based on the experience you have made. So this is the ABCs model. This ABCs has been transferred into digital variations, and there are lots of different ways how you can implement it. You will see that later. There are quite a few publications on this model. However, as it is always further developing, it's not the end of it at all. We are actually continuing the work also with the digitalization now. One of our very important projects was in 2000 to 2011. It was called the Trans ABCs, funded by the EU and US government, a FIPSI grant, Atlantis grant, and actually those 12 EU and US campuses participated. The motivation for this project was that everybody said, you always advocate your model, can you prove that it works? And so we finally said we have to do a big project with a lot of participants and try to find out whether it really works. So the project aimed at developing intercultural awareness with the help of the ABCs, and we actually administered a pre-post survey, a transcultural scale, in order to measure the effect of the ABCs. We standardized the procedure across all the different campuses, and we met several times and found out about the core curriculum in Europe and in the United States, and it was very hard work, but it really turned out to be well. So we had 2 years time, and the total participants were 763. The complete data set was 557. We collected 557 autobiographies, biographies, and so forth and so on. But I will only talk about the pre- and post-cultural survey, the transcultural scale. What we did with the survey is we grouped the groups into quartiles, those that achieved the lowest points with respect to cultural openness, and those that achieved the most points with respect to cultural openness in the scale. As you can see here is the highest group actually didn't change a lot. Actually, they even dropped a tiny little bit, which is typical for the highest group. Done lots of empirical research. It's very typical also in competence and standards tests. However, the lowest 25% that were very skeptical and xenophobic, they significantly, with highest significance, changed their attitude over the course of the ABCs, and this was a very important result. You can see that here, T1 and T2, the students' T-test. So this is very important. I only wanted to show you that if you're interested, you can have the list and reread the whole study. This is our first study. So the change of the perception of the lowest quartile with an increase in their openness towards more cultural heterogeneity between pre-test and post-test is highly significant for the total sample as well as the sample of the participating groups from Germany, the United States, Poland, and it's significant for the group from Spain. As I said, they all work with the ABCs model, and the whole process takes around the whole semester. It's a semester-long work. It's being implemented, and I've done the course in many countries across the world. We did another project, the ABCs as Life Stories, where we teamed up our students with seniors older than 80 plus. And this was in the frame of a CLIL teaching, content and language integrated teaching with a focus on history. So we did this other course also using the ABCs as a model. Our students interviewed seniors, and it was very interesting that what our results were. For example, here, a student wrote about her senior. Due to sickness, the senior missed the first day of school, which is celebrated, includes the Zuckertüte. The Zuckertüte is like a cupboard filled with sugar and sweets to sweeten up the school start for children. And it's typical that children get that in Germany, but also in, I think, Austria, in Italy as no. And it's interesting that, for example, families migrating to Germany, they are very, very eager. Everybody wants to have that sugar cupboard. But what's interesting here is you look at the life story, how important it is to the senior. I think he was 92. That's the first thing he told, that he missed that first day with the sugar cupboard. And so it's really interesting how deeply ingrained school experience is in life stories. And that's what we found out across all the life stories. So it's about school, the life stories, rituals, festivities, and highly critical incidents. Another one was, another senior told us, he experienced legal restraint because he was not allowed to be a left-hander. In those days, that was not allowed, and there was punishment. Also, he attended a very small school where different age groups shared one room, like class 1, 2, 3, and 4. But staying down was meant literally because the children who stayed down had to continue sitting in the same seat in that room for another year. So sitzen bleiben, I also started reflecting about the term in German then when I heard that. I had never thought about it. It means you stay in your same seat for another year, and this is very stigmatizing. So that was another story one of our seniors told. We also have a lot of regional culture in the context of history. Here you see the divided Germany until 1989. Since we were very young, my father told my sister and me about the border fence that existed along the village and prohibited people could go to the neighboring village, Besekendorf. We found it surreal to imagine the border fence because today the border is hardly visible anymore. A little forest, a street which leads to the village, and many cornfields. So it really still makes me freeze when I think about the silent revolution we had in 1989. And of course this is very relevant, I think, to North and South Korea, if I think about this example of Germany, East and West. Language variety and culture was also another thing mentioned. As a Saxonian, she did not always feel comfortable in her new environment in northern Germany because people frowned upon her due to her accent. There's a distinct accent for the different regions in Germany. And another student said, I went to elementary school in Thuringia, Eastern Federal State, where I also lived during that period of time. Nevertheless, I spent much time at my grandparents' house in Duderstadt, Lower Saxony. I oscillated between two geographically close but culturally different places. I find that very powerful by saying that. Geographically close but culturally completely distant, East and West. So in Thuringia, people noticed that my pronunciation was different, so all the students called me Wessie at the bus stop, the one from the West. These are just a few examples. We had very powerful. I published these autobiographies for the first time because usually autobiographies are not published, but the seniors really wanted to be published. So we published the book in German, and you can read more if you are interested. It's very powerful stories, not just by German seniors, also from the United States, from Poland, from people who were in camps, in war camps. So we have very powerful stories. And there is a win-win situation for all participants. It gives voice to the seniors. Here you can see a German senior and the girl. She's actually from a country where she had to escape because of war, and she told the senior her story, and then the senior in the end said she learned a lot more from the girl than the girl learned from her. So it can be applied in the school context, and within the process of student and senior talk, memories as to critical incidents are elicited and shared, and students discover intangible cultural heritage through the life stories. And this brings me to the third application in the primary school context. So we have many different applications of this model, and of course there are a lot more. So here we asked Maria Sussex, one of my doctoral students, she examined how do primary school children construct their own cultural identities and how do they construct the cultural identities of others. And she developed a me book. So instead of talking about an autobiography, she made it into a me book and a we book. She skipped step B, she only implemented step A and C. So she had the me book, they created the me book, very nicely done, with a lot of guided questions and pictures and drawings. And then they came together, shared their me books, and created a we book. And she followed up with interviews, and all in all, she has a large documentation of a highly diverse school in Frankfurt, where I would say nearly 80% of the children, or 90%, have a migration background in the primary school. Her research questions were, she found out that family members and cultural origin have a great influence on the child's construction of cultural identity. There are many dynamic hybrid identity constructions. The affective stand towards language is related to personal identification, and foreign languages taught at school are seen as prestigious languages. Children add them to their linguistic identities in the language silhouette. We used language silhouettes by Grom. Children also have a normative view on the cultural identity of others. For example, when a child said, I'm a Frankfurt girl, then somebody said, no, you're Turkish. So there was a debate, would she be Turkish or German, or what would she be? And she said, I'm simply a Frankfurt girl. So families, ethnic origin is important for the child's construction. And the diversity of the multicultural classroom does not automatically lead to the initiation of cultural learning and mutual appreciation. This is very important. We found out that there can, in the contrast, it can be manifestation, and we really need cultural awareness activities and language awareness activities to dissolve this. I can show you this here. It's a very nice interview between the two girls.
Und auf Platz 1 und Platz 3, da hast du zweimal Urdu gesetzt. Warum?
Warte. Hier.
Bei den Sprachen.
Oh, hier.
Platz 1 Urdu und Platz 3 auch wieder Urdu. Warum
Das
belegen beide Plätze?
Meine Muttersprache ist das, weil.
Okay.
Also es ist, meine Mutter spricht so. Also es geht so, guck mal. Zuallererst kommt die Mutter, dann zweite kommt die Mutter, dritte kommt die Mutter, vierte kommt die Mutter, fünfte kommt die Mutter, dann kommt der Vater und dann kommt also die Bekannten.
Okay.
5-mal die Mutter kommt.
Okay, also wichtig ist das. Aha, alles klar. Aber deine Mutter spricht doch Punjabi, warum kommt das
Also nicht immer, mit ihren Schwestern, also das war so mit meinen Tanten.
Okay.
Also mit uns spricht sie Urdu.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a very nice example because you see how the children reflected on the language identity, and it's unbelievable how strong the impact of the mother is in this case, because she says first comes the mother, second, third, fourth, fifth, and then sixth comes the father, and then only the other people in the family. So that's really it's cute on the one hand, but it shows you sorry, can we move on, how deeply they reflect on the language and their language identity, and the follow-up interviews are very important, and those follow-up interviews, they trigger metacognition. We had the same with stimulated recall procedures that we used in the project, and it's very important to follow up whatever you do, and then confront the children or the students or also adults with their own products and ask them, here you wrote this, but not for justification, but just explain. It's very important not to make them justify, but just explain. Can you explain that to me? I don't quite understand. Why have you written Urdu 5 times? Okay, so we believe that the ABCs is a highly powerful approach in order to raise cultural awareness and language awareness. And our studies reach from 6-year-old to 100-year-old participants. My oldest participant was 102 and she just passed. And her family is so happy that they have the story. It said on the one hand that she passed, but she became very, very old, 102, and she could tell her story at the age of 101 because we went there and interviewed her, and the interviews last usually, there are 3 sessions. Through the ABC's approach, participants become aware of the values of both tangible and intangible heritage of the self and others, of values and beliefs, anxieties, feelings people have, and the approach leads to engagement and responsibility. The biggest plus is that the ABC's approach is applicable to all age groups and all ethnic groups, and you can use it in religious education, in biology, whatever you like. It facilitates the discovery of intangible cultural heritage. And the latest book, will be published this year. It's in progress right now. I'm publishing this together with Farhad Saidi from Calgary University. She's a former doctoral student of Cummins, and with Bettina Bu from Denmark. And there are international applications of the ABC's project, but also the books that I showed before all the articles are international articles, also from Trans ABCs. So if you have any further questions, these are the other two books with articles from the United States and from Europe. And if you have any questions, please address me, and this is my contact data. Thank you very much.
So good afternoon. My name is Makiko Deguchi. I come from Sophia University. I'm a cultural psychologist, and so today the topic of microaggression, it comes from the field of counseling psychology. So let's begin. We're using microaggression in the classroom, focusing on everyday experiences of minority students. Because this is a kind of education conference, I wanted to sort of limit it to classroom experience, but not all the examples are necessarily in the classroom. So I do think that it is our responsibility as faculty to create safe learning spaces for all of our students. And understanding of microaggression is crucial in appreciating the daily indignities that minority students face on campus and in the classroom. So today I'd like to introduce types of microaggressions that are faced by students and make some recommendations for faculty and also administrators. So what do I mean by minority students? So here, these are just various types of minorities, but I also will be talking about racial ethnic minorities in Japan as well in today's talk. So the term microaggression was first coined by Harvard University psychiatrist Chester Pierce in 1970 to describe the insults and dismissals which he regularly witnessed non-Black Americans inflicting on African Americans. So Chester Pierce was an African American psychiatrist. Daryl Wing Sue, a professor in counseling psychology at Columbia University, sort of took over this research and kind of expanded it. And in 2010, he published Microaggressions in Everyday Life. And so, again, as a psychologist, I was very excited to see this, and this made a kind of big splash within the field of psychology. Okay. In 2020, 10 years later, this is the second edition. Right? A lot of the constructs were kind of revised somewhat, and it's kind of reaching the second stage. So if you are going to pick up and read upon microaggressions, I do recommend the second edition. I think it's a much simplified, and based on a lot more research. So Lisa Spanierman was co-authored, and I also had the privilege to invite Lisa Spanierman to Sophia University in 2021 when we did a big microaggression conference. So the Japanese translation of this book came out in 2020, and this is the microaggressions study group, and these are the names of the people that were involved in the translation of this book. Now, do you notice anything among these names? Okay. 3 of them are Zainichi Koreans. Okay, so these are Koreans whose ancestor stems from the Japan's colonialization of Korean Peninsula. So and this is actually a group from Ritsumeikan University. So these are graduate students and the professor. Professor is Nakamura Tadashi. Okay. The rest are graduate students, and they were reading the Dr. Seuss book in English in kind of their study group. And then they realized, you know what, this is so relevant to the Zainichi Korean experience that why don't we just translate the book? And I found out from Professor Nakamura that he was translating this book, and I was actually disappointed because this was the next book that I was going to translate. Okay? Yeah, I was eyeing this. Okay? But actually, I was really glad because of the, the large percentage of, right, ethnic minority, right, members in the group. I think it's really meaningful. That they thought that this concept was very useful in Japan. They needed this. And they did this, and it came out in 2020. Okay, so the first time I heard of the word microaggressions in Japan was in the Japan Times in May 2012, where a white American man who naturalized to becoming Japanese, David Ardo, he's kind of, it's kind of famous in Japan, right? The title of his column was, "Yes, I Can Use Chopsticks, the Everyday Microaggressions That Grind Us Down." So he was basically saying, right, when you go to Japan as a white person, no matter how long you live in Japan, how fluent you are in Japanese, you get this, "Oh, you can use chopsticks? Oh, you speak such good Japanese. How hard do you think Japanese is? How long are you staying in Japan?" Right? Okay? And he says, this is starting to really wear me down. Okay? And so he said, these are microaggressions. Now, the Japanese reaction to this was kind of like, this is, we don't mean bad. We just want to like get to know you, right? We're innocent here. Okay? And so this is the issue around microaggressions, is that people who are saying or doing the microaggressions, right, really don't think they're doing anything wrong. Okay? So microaggressions is defined as commonplace verbal, behavioral, or environmental ignominies, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative slights and insults to people in the target group. Okay. Now the word microaggressions, right, used to be considered as kind of slight indignities, okay? But a lot of minorities are like, this is not slight, okay? This is actually really hurtful. Okay. So in the second edition, the word micro was kind of redefined as we're actually talking about actions at the individual level, right, in the sort of ecological model. Okay. And so, and to sort of, say that, these are not sort of slight things. These are not small, subtle things. Some examples of racial microaggressions, because, also Daryl Wing Su, as you saw, was a Chinese American. So he really, was studying a lot about racial microaggressions. So things like, you speak good English, right? And I used to get that all the time. And being an Asian person, right, who spoke, kind of native American English. And, in the beginning I was like, oh, thanks, But then I was like, why do they keep, I grew up in I did grow up in the United States, so of course I would be, speak English. And so these are kind of, so microaggressions are, seemingly complementary, right? But there are hidden messages, hidden aggressions, right? That when you hear this multiple times, you start to wonder, do I belong? Okay. So you speak good English can mean you are not expected to speak good English. Okay? You are a foreigner. You are not American. We don't see you as one of us. Okay? And this one, Daryl Wing Su says, it's kind of this, alien in one's own land, a perpetual foreigner. Okay? African Americans get this a lot. You are a credit to your race. Okay? And so it kind of, again, it seems like a compliment at first glance, okay? But the hidden message is people of color are not as intelligent as whites. You are the exception, is the message. My own experience as an Asian person growing up in the United States, in high school, I was on the track team, high school track team, and the coach said, is it okay if I call you Maddie? Because Makiko is just really hard for me to pronounce. Right? And because I had kind of internalized that, like, I am a minority and I should go along with white people, basically, I was like, yeah, sure, And so I did, but again, the hidden message here was, right, we cannot be bothered to try to remember your name correctly because it is a strange name, right, to us. You need to accommodate to us. You need to change your name, right, to fit our view and perceptions. So this would be, again, kind of a microaggression. So microaggressions are not just racial, but includes, all other kinds of identities. And oftentimes microaggressions are mostly committed by members of the dominant group, so the majority, the dominant group, towards members of the minority groups. So what I guess I want to say is that there is a power asymmetry that's happening. Right? So that's, it's not always, but it's oftentimes where people in the dominant group, right, like Japanese doing it to foreigner, or men, right, doing it to women. Okay. Daryl Wing Sue has a microaggression sort of layout. He kind of subdivides the racial microaggressions into micro-insult, micro-assault, micro-invalidation. Okay. I think for the purposes of this talk, you don't need to maybe know this, but I will sort of give you examples of each. So micro-assaults is one of the things under the umbrella of microaggressions, but micro-assaults are the kind of the conscious, explicit derivations. Okay? So these are kind of things that we would just outright say that was racist. Micro-insults occurs often outside the level of conscious awareness, and so these are kind of verbal slights that are rude, insensitive, or demeaning. And micro-invalidations are also similar in that they kind of occur on the unconscious level, but they tend to deny or negate or nullify the experience and the reality of the targeted individual. And Daryl Sue argues that micro-invalidations are actually the most insidious form because it kind of directly attacks and denies the experiential realities that members of minority groups are facing. There are also environmental microaggressions, which are things that happen more on the macro level. For example, top executives in a corporation are all Japanese men, or top administrators in a university are all men. Okay, so that kind of environment. Okay. Actually, there's another example I always use was having conferences, where the photograph of all the previous, predecessors, are all male on the wall. I was looking at this, sorry, you kind of notice, that we were having a meeting in that kind of an office. But also things like, there are no English signs on college campuses, right? To send a message, right, that, we're not really catering towards non-Japanese. So here are some examples of Zainichi Korean students who might, the kind of microaggressions that they might receive in Japan. Okay? So micro-insults are the more everyday condescension. So when Zainichi Koreans talk about discrimination, they're met with, well, if you don't like it here, why don't you just go back to your country? And a lot of Japanese don't know the history because we don't teach the history of why Koreans are in Japan in the first place. Or, are you from North or South Korea? Okay. Where are you living in Japan? Are your parents both Korean? Okay, so they get a lot of these kind of questions. When Zainichi Koreans start using their ethnic name, so they, a lot of Zainichi Koreans actually use their Japanese name, right, to pass, because life is unfortunately a lot easier. But then when they start using their Korean name to sort of reclaim the identity, they get with like, so it's you that's creating the wall between us, you know that. Or you're just trying to be a Zainichi wannabe. Or people thinking that they are from Korea or South Korea saying, oh, your Japanese is really good. And they get this like 50% of the time, I think, Zainichi Koreans get this, you're good at Japanese. Micro-invalidation is, being denied their experience. So when Zainichi Koreans talk about discrimination, they're often met with, well, you guys discriminate against each other too, or I'm also discriminated as a woman. Right? And these are kind of things that people say to discount, right, the experiences. Also, when Zainichi Koreans talk about hate speech, they are met with, well, Koreans also have anti-Japanese sentiment in Korea too, or you're too sensitive. Right? The hate speech isn't about you personally, so just don't let it bother you. Right? Other things that they're told is, I don't discriminate against you, I'm not prejudiced. It doesn't bother me at all what you are, okay? Or you're practically Japanese. Okay? You're with other people, Japanese people, so don't worry about it. Like, we'll protect you. Japanese, Korean, doesn't matter. And so, so that's the experience, of Zainichi Koreans. Here are some Filipino Japanese students who often get, oh, you don't look Japanese, or you look Japanese, right? So being commented on their looks. At first, it appears to be an innocent comment, but the hidden messages can mean, right? You do not get to decide who you are. We're the ones that kind of get to label you, whether you're Japanese or not. Okay. Other things, mixed roots individuals, or people who are biracial, multiracial, often get this, what are you? Are you Japanese? Again, hidden messages, right? You are not normal, it's okay for me to ask you about it. Okay. You do not belong. Also, multiracial students get their hair touched, like, oh, right? So this crossing that boundary, okay? Or, people that they meet for the first time, right, ask about, like, are you Japanese, half Japanese, like, how did your parents meet, right? They have to, disclose, very personal information. And so, again, want to emphasize here, right, that, power inequality, does exist, right? Because the person asking is basically saying, it's okay for us to ask you, you really should offer these personal information to us, right? And that's perfectly okay. In Japan, we have the remnants of a caste system called the buraku, and they used to be the lowest caste system, during the Edo period and before. Okay, and unfortunately, Japanese don't teach about the buraku discrimination, so people don't even know what they are. What buraku? So they get a lot of they get a lot of micro invalidations, as you can see. So here are some LGBTQ students, microaggressions, okay? We don't have any LGBTQ in our department, or in our college, or, I don't really see them, or, things like, that's so gay, or he's gay, but he's really nice. So, and then, this happens a lot. Be careful, he won't come on to you. When you tell them you're traveling with somebody who identifies as gay. Okay, for trans students, right, are you a man or a woman? Right? And I had a student, at my university who was asked this in front of the whole class, and it was very traumatizing for the student. Okay. Environmental microaggressions against trans students at the university could be having, again, only bathrooms that are male-female. Okay. And the hidden message here is we haven't really considered the fact that you may be on our campus. Right? Or changing rooms that only have two choices, forms of gender-only choices, like the documents that you fill out in the university only has male and female. Okay? I used to do a lot of this, calling Mr. Ms. in my class, and I stopped doing that, or saying, hey, ladies and gentlemen, I kind of stopped doing that, right? Because I have, well, not because I have trans students in my class, but again, I really wanted to make it inclusive. I don't know what students' sexual or gender identities are, so I try to be inclusive, in my class. Here is a Japan Times article that came out in 2018 by Baye McNeil. He's an African American man who's lived in Japan for quite a long time. 10 years ago, he wrote this empty seat on a crowded Japanese train. So basically, being a black man in Japan, no matter how crowded it is, he's always finds his seat, an empty seat. Okay? And 10 years later, he revisits that. So he has another article. So he wrote the first one in 2008, the second one 10 years later, and he says it's still pretty empty. Right? It's still pretty empty in Japan, but there are some improvements. Okay? Women experience gender microaggressions. Okay? So women get this, oh, you're really lucky, you could always be a housewife. You don't really have to work that hard to get a job after, and for college, or, like, why are you getting a job after college? Do you really seriously plan on working for your entire life? So these are, kinds of microaggressions that women experience. Okay. So again, going back to the David Arudo article, yes, I can use chopsticks, the everyday microaggressions that grind us down, right? These kinds of things that Japanese people say to, oftentimes people who we consider, foreign, right? And the hidden message of can you use chopsticks could be, manual dexterity is linked to phenotype. You speak such good Japanese, low expectation that you'll master our complex language. How long are you staying in Japan? Right? You are a professional for this land, but we don't really expect you to stay here forever. Okay. So again, context matters, right, in microaggressions. So this is not like you can't say this to anybody anymore, right? But I think, if you're the first-time tourist, and some people are like, oh, your Japanese is excellent, right? It's kind of a nice, right? But again, if you're an international student coming here to study Japanese, the first time it might be kind of nice. Wow, Japanese people are so polite. But after a while, it's like, why do they keep saying the same thing? So I think, so it's not about, prohibiting to say certain things. It's about, we need to think about, do we have any other questions that we want to ask, people who are not from Japan? Okay. And this part I'm just going to skip over, but this was from Daryl Wing Su's Microaggressions and Marginality, a Manifestation, Dynamics, and Impact. It's from his other book, where he goes into the microaggression. He classifies microaggressions against international students in the United States. So these are, quite, they're very specific. So it might be something that's interesting to you. Microaggressions, I think, are hard because if you are given like an overt or blatant racist comment, people will sympathize with you. But when it's a microaggression, people are like, aren't you overthinking this? You don't get the same kind of care and sympathy from others. So that's really hard, okay? Why don't you just let it go? The person didn't mean any harm. Don't make such a big deal out of it. Why are you so bothered? Why are you so sensitive? Okay, right? So this is actually sometimes harder when you have microaggressions. Okay? So the recipient is often placed in a tough position. Okay? When a microaggression occurs, they first have to determine what happened. Was that a microaggression? I don't feel good about this. Why? So there's a whole kind of cognitive process where you're determining what has just occurred, and then you have to go, okay, do I respond or not respond? Okay, if I respond, I have to do it right away. So it's like a time limit to this response. It's very stressful. Okay, and then the incident is over before response can be made. Okay, and then you start thinking, well, did that really happen? Did I just imagine that? And then you kind of start justifying that you didn't say anything, saying, well, if I said anything, it won't do any good anyway, so it's probably better that I didn't say anything. Okay. And then you kind of, also sometimes fear the consequences, right? If there's a power indifference between the people, do you want to call that out, right? Or not. So these are why microaggressions are harder for the person who receives it, because it doesn't end when the microaggression ends, right? They continue to think about it, forever. It's very rare that you kind of forget the incident. I think it just stays with you. Right? I think one of the things that have come out of microaggression research in the field of psychology is that they've been able to document long-term psychological impact on health and mental health. Okay? So this takes a toll, right? And so, if you receive a microaggression, I think self-care is the most important thing. Are we getting low on time? Okay, all right, so I'll wrap up. Basically, it's really important to know that it is not your fault, okay? If I can just, when a microaggression happens, right, no, this is not your fault, okay? And if you want to educate others, pick your battles. So if you would like to, address microaggressions, become an ally and be a kind of a, bystander intervention, here are some, couple of slides where you could, there's some, ways to intervene, right? I know you meant that to be funny, but that wasn't funny, or, I don't think that's true at all, right? So there's ways to sort of jump in, right? If somebody makes a microaggression, to kind of disarm it. I do want to discuss, this is a graphic novel by Ku Shai, okay, and it was translated into Japanese for the Japanese market, and I was asked to write a book review of it, and it's really a wonderful, it's called My Darling Japanese Online Reader. So this is a Korean woman who came to Japan to study 4 years in university. Okay? And she dates a Japanese man, okay, who ends up becoming a kind of an online right-winger, you know, and very anti-Korean. Okay? So she gets a lot of microaggressions, but one of the microaggressions she gets all the time is, you speak good Japanese. And she writes here in this comic here, I did not realize at the time that this phrase is reserved only for foreigners and used only for foreigners that Japanese think is their Japanese is not equivalent to Japanese. Okay. So this is the scene there. But this is actually a wonderful book because it teaches us, you know, the Japanese that you know we are actually, the dominant group is creating an environment that is very, you know, hard on non-Japanese. And so I just wanted to introduce that. Okay. So, you know, why is it important? Well, I do think that Japanese people, members of dominant groups need to change and be responsible to change. Okay. So just kind of, my slides tend to be very wordy, so I'm just going to skip over. Okay, but maybe I should end with Sue's comment. Power is often correlated with economic and military might, but that true power resides in the ability to define reality. So, so microaggressions, I think, you know, is a word that came out because now minorities can say this is happening to us. You know, there's now a word that labels our experience. So it's no longer invisible, but we can make it visible. All right, so, okay. Right. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.